everyone. And in today's discussion on corporate social responsibility, you may know our next guest or have seen emails from him on the topic centered around supply chain management if you subscribe to the industry leading association. Abe Eshkenazi is the Chief Executive Officer at the Association of Supply Chain Management, and ASCM is the largest nonprofit organization for supply chain management and is the global leader in supply chain organizational transformation and innovation. Abe, thank you for joining us today, and I would like to personally thank you for your work that you and your organization have been doing to further the body of knowledge within the supply chain practice and all of the publications and help that you have put out during the pandemic of 2020.
I really appreciate it, Justin. It wasn't too long ago that you and I had to explain what we did to our family and our friends and have them look at us quizzically and what do you mean by supply chain? In a very short time period. This has become a topic at every boardroom and every kitchen table, which is now doubling as a boardroom in a lot of situations. We're seeing a significant shift about the awareness between the consumers and patients alike. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about social responsibility as well as supply chain as we know it, and hopefully explain a little bit more to our listeners.
Yes, you make an excellent point where we're trying to explain it, because I always say that even whenever I was teaching supply chain management, I said, just look at your phone, right? I said, how do you think you get this apple in your hand, right? All the parts that go into the apple, whenever Apple creates the iPhone 50, how they source all those products that go into the phone. I said, that's supply chain management. Yeah. But now, we're saying, you remember during the pandemic when you couldn't find toilet paper, when you couldn't find hand sanitizer? That's supply chain management, right? So, yeah, everyone's able to relate to the importance of the practice.
Yeah, we've seen the benefits of it, but we've also seen how fragile it is in certain cases where we have not been able to respond, as you indicated, to surges or shifts in demand. And this is a learning for us as an industry.
Yes. So in terms of corporate social responsibility, how have you seen it evolve within the industry, and where do you see it going in the future?
I think we're seeing a convergence of the focus on supply chain with the efficiencies and just in time and all of the aspects of what makes a consumer and a patient satisfied with the products that they're ordering, either in terms of variety, in terms of delivery times. We've seen a significant shift to e-commerce and the general public becoming a little bit more comfortable with the concept of e-commerce. Mm-hmm. But in between this concept of just in time and fulfilling our consumers and our patients' expectations is a much longer term view. This is not just about the economics. Obviously, every organization needs to be sustainable economically, otherwise they're out of business. So that's the first test for a lot of organizations is, can we be financially, solvent as an organization? Then we've seen a discussion about your vendors, and are they complying with human rights? Are they, what is your vendor evaluation and your criteria look like, not only internally, but externally? And how do you hold yourself and your partners accountable to the standards, not only from your own industry, but we can elevate it to the UN Global Compact, as well as a number of other benchmarking indicators to identify how organizations are responding to a corporate social responsibility. We've seen the discussion of the Business Roundtable come out last year and indicate that corporate social responsibility was among the priorities of an organization, not only on the financial side, but for the long-term sustainability of our environment, as well as the ethical aspect of it. So we've seen a rise in terms of the awareness and the implementation of sustainability standards, albeit it's been a little bit haphazard and it's almost by industry. So if you take a look at food, they have their own standards. If you take a look at apparel, they have their own standards. If you take a look at electronics, they have their own standards. And that's not inconsistent because obviously every industry has unique aspects of their sourcing, their manufacturing, their warehousing, delivering, all the aspects of the supply chain. Unfortunately, in certain cases, we've seen organizations focus on compliance only in their, the immediate sort of macro environment, and that is tier one, and not really getting into visibility or transparency throughout the extended supply chain.
Right.
So part of the challenge that we face now, we've seen organizations and leadership become much more aware of corporate social responsibility. I think the challenge for us now is to incorporate the leadership for supply chain with the leadership for sustainability as well as climate change, so that developed strategies are consistent with a long-term view of sustainability for the organization. And from our perspective, on three dimensions: economic, environmental, and social. Those to us are critical for organizations to pay attention to as we not only deal with this current pandemic, but as we develop strategies on how to become sustainable in the future.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so you mentioned the triple bottom line, that we hear about whenever we discuss corporate social responsibility. We talk about the triple bottom line, right? And you briefly touched on this, where when we talk about corporate social responsibility, we think of it from an internal perspective, right? And you talked about holding those vendors accountable, reviewing, increasing transparency and visibility to those larger supply chain business partners. Whenever we talk about that, I think Amazon.
Yep.
Right? How can Amazon have a corporate social responsibility policy with their numerous vendors throughout their supply chain network?
That's a challenge. I think you're recognizing, and I think you're identifying what among the key challenges when we start to talk about e-commerce, especially the Amazon effect, in that they produce nothing. They facilitate almost every product that you can imagine through their website. However, they have a responsibility to ensure that the consumer and or the patient, when they're evaluating a vendor, that they have some confidence or at least some surety that the vendor, specifically Amazon, has done some screening for these vendors. Obviously, it's impossible for you as an individual to get the data necessary for an organization as to whether they are responsible or they're producing or sourcing their products in a responsible and an accountable fashion. Oftentimes, we have to trust other organizations that report on the companies. And so we take a look at specific industries in terms of what are the indicators for those industries that would advise a purchaser or a consumer how organizations are doing in that industry. And again, we have to be very specific about the industries. We can take a look at the food industry, and in terms of water usage, and in terms of humane treatment of their workers and labor rights, and coming out of the COVID pandemic with the the production facilities between Tyson and some of the other manufacturing facilities, where you had a presidential order to keep them open, but yet we can't keep our workers safe. So right. What is the public to do? Where is the public to go to gain knowledge and to assess, are the partners or the vendors that I'm using, are they responsible? Do they have at least the appropriate statements? Do they comply with them? And do they report out on them? I would say that we're probably in a mixed bag on this. We're in a quilt. A lot of organizations have taken a very proactive approach in identifying how they comply and how their impact on the environment is affected, while other organizations don't report out. And I think this is part of the challenge that we have, is that we don't have consistency in terms of reporting, and we don't have consistency in terms of what is being reported. So even if companies report out, it's not sufficient to say, this is my carbon footprint. That is the start of a CSR campaign. Obviously, you have to get much deeper into the organization, as you indicated, transparency and visibility to your extended supply chain. Where do you source from? Where do you manufacture? What does your waste footprint look like? What does your recycling footprint look like? There are a number of indicators, both qualitative and quantitative, that we can use, but we need to start to dig into the industries to ensure that we have the appropriate metrics, number one. And then secondly, that organizations are complying with them and reporting out on them. But to your point, for the consumer and or the patient, it becomes extremely difficult to take a look at a e-commerce site and to discern who is complying and who is socially responsible and who isn't. unfortunately, we have to do a little bit, the consumer has to do a little bit of digging.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you brought up a point that kind of piqued my interest a little bit, because I do remember where Tyson had that presidential order to stay open, and there's not much research out there, but there's some research on the concept of corporate political responsibility, right? And the research is more centered around other countries where you have that mandatory corporate social responsibility, right? But the question is, do you think that the United States could get to a mandatory CSR, type policy?
I think it may be difficult because of the variance that we see within industries. Obviously, holding a food manufacturer to the same standards that you would hold an apparel manufacturer or a producer would be difficult. So we need to get within the industries and identify what are those characteristics within the industry that would denote that this organization or this industry is compliant, number one. Number two, are they reporting out? So I would often take a look at the industry associations that promulgate and set standards. I think this is among the areas that we want to start. I'm a little bit hesitant to say that the government should establish those standards. I would say that industry associations and a public-private partnership can better identify what are those critical data elements that we need to report on to indicate to the public that organizations are complying, and more importantly, that the information that they're providing is responsible and is reliable. I'm a little bit hesitant that we could find one either metric or one standard. In our research, what we've done is we've seen by industry very different standards that that organizations are complying with. And so we would probably, from our perspective, promote the concept of the industry standards as well as global standards, such as the UN Global Compact.
Right.
Now, there are standards that every organization can, comply with, but yet I think we need industry-specific metrics as well as more macro-level CSR.
Right. Yeah. So you talked about that UN Global Impact, and we also discussed the Global Reporting Initiative sustainability reporting within the course. Now, that is absolutely voluntary, but they're looking, it's a continuous process, and they're looking to standardize that reporting, right? Now, what benefits do you see to that global standardized reporting initiative? And to your point of the industry specific, are there any drawbacks to that GRI type approach?
Yeah, that great point, because I think we're recognizing the global aspect of supply chains. This is not a national issue. This is a global issue. And when we talk about CSR, you're not just talking about a U.S. issue. You're talking about labor across the globe, and sourcing as well as manufacturing, storing, and delivering. There are a significant number of indicators that would drive us much more towards a consistency in terms of a global reporting, but yet much more specific on the industry or the company specific indicators. I think this has challenged a lot of organizations because there are so many standards that are out there. And to your point, what should the consumer be concerned with? And what we're facing right now is a much more informed consumer than we had in the past. And so let's go to our first conversation here, where people really didn't understand supply chain. Now everybody's a supply chain expert, and they're starting to dig into some of the information, and what they're finding is not consistent. Yes. And so this is now going to start challenging us as a supply chain industry to be much more forthcoming with our information and to deal with consumers and our patients' expectations. The concept of the conscious consumer it's here. People are aware of what's in their products and services, and more importantly, brand equity is impacted by either a negative story about your supply chain, and there are enough examples that we can identify of organizations that have been impacted, whether through slave labor or child labor or conflict materials, that have had significant disruptions within their supply chains. the impact is significant on the brand value. So if we're talking about the right thing to do for an organization, and that is to lay out your standards, more importantly, to ensure that you do have visibility and that you are not surprised by what you find in your supply chain, because consumers and patients alike are interested in the products and the services, and more importantly, the companies they align with. While it may not be relevant for you and I, Justin, because we're a little bit older in the demographic, I will tell you, my son, who's 20 years old, and his friends care about the companies that they buy from.
Yes.
They evaluate them before they say, is this company, what do they do? How are they responsible? What is their statement on, gender equity? What is their statement on human rights, on labor? Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing much more attention paid by the consumer to the companies and their actions, not just their words.
Yes, that's an excellent point, because I think that with the things that are going on right now, I think that you're going to see, just as with supply chain management, you're going to see more visibility, in terms of corporate social responsibility. Now that goes on to my next question, in that your organization now offers the ASCM Award of Excellence in Making an Impact that's centered around, organizations that are pioneers in corporate social responsibility and sustainable practices. Now, given this availability that we just talked about, are you seeing an increase in entrants or candidates or organizations for this award?
I think we're in an unusual time period right now, because what I'd like to do is give everybody that is in supply chain that award today because of what they've had to deal with just in the past 3 to 4 months. I think we need to recognize our supply chain heroes, our frontline workers, healthcare, as well as those individuals in essential businesses that have been working to protect us, and more importantly, so that we can get the economy back on the rails and moving forward again. From the organization perspective, we'd like to see a greater attention paid to supply chain professionals, as well as sustainability professionals and climate change officers. These are roles within an organization that have always provided advice. Now they need to provide leadership. And so what we're considering, or what we're asking, is for these individuals to step up and develop consistent strategies on supply chain sustainability and climate change for long-term impact, not just responding to the current disruption. It's often easy to make decisions because of the short-term issues that we're dealing with this pandemic. Our hope is that as those decisions are made, you're doing it with an eye towards long-term sustainability and corporate social responsibility. We have a significant opportunity today to recast the supply chains appropriately. This is not to say that there will not be bumps in the road as we move forward and identify what's critical to our national defense or our national security. That will have policy issues. As you had indicated before, the politics of supply chain is going to change. Mm-hmm. We're taking a look at organizations and products that are going to nearshore or reestablish manufacturing within the United States for what we now consider critical to our national defense or our national security. Mm-hmm. Think personal protection equipment, active pharmaceutical ingredients for the medications. There are a whole host of opportunities that we have to reshore, but that's going to have a trailing impact on trade negotiations with the countries that we currently source from. So it's hard to decouple the changes that we're going to make in the short term that will not have a long-term effect, not only in terms of trade relations, but in terms of long-term sustainability and corporate social responsibility. Our hope is that the individuals that are responsible, climate change officers, sustainability professionals, and supply chain professionals, are working hand in hand to develop the strategies to ensure that organizations coming out of this are doing it in an accountable and a responsible fashion.
Okay. Now, you brought up a number of things so in turn, as this practice is going to, that's literally evolving daily, to be honest. We know that, there's going to be an importance of, project managers, supply chain professionals, forecasting professionals. Mm-hmm. You mentioned something in, negotiations, right? So as we are, nearshoring, our supplies, our manufacturing, we're going to need specialists in the negotiations, right? Mm-hmm. So to extend on that, what other roles do you see that were not really commonplace within supply chain management that you foresee an emergence in the coming months and years?
Great point. It used to be subject matter expertise and functional competencies were sufficient for supply chain professionals. If you were an SME and you knew the processes, that was sufficient. That's the price of entry today. Organizations are looking for significant leadership skills, collaboration, communication. You're looking at, as you indicated, project management as a core aspect of this, and working not only across the enterprise, but across your vendors as well as your customers, having a much greater appreciation for the entire ecosystem that organizations are encompassing within their supply chains. This is really coming out of the back office for the men and women that had always done the job, but are now being recognized for the strategic nature of the role of supply chain. We always knew that they could do the tying out of orders and manufacturing and production plans and all the things necessary to ensure that we're taking a raw material and we're getting it to a customer in an efficient and effective manner. Now we're expecting the critical thinking, future planning as part of their, you had indicated forecasting, which is, I think, a very dangerous thing right now beyond 3 to 6 months right now. I'm not sure a whole lot of organizations are forecasting 12 to, 36 months right now.
No long range plans going on here.
But the two areas that we're seeing that organizations are looking for is first, communication. An individual has to be able to communicate and articulate and set the strategy. And then collaboration, as I indicated before, working across the enterprise with sustainability professionals and climate change officers to establish those metrics as well as those strategies to ensure that the organization is sustainable for the future. I'm not a big fan of the term soft skills. I don't think there's anything soft about being a manager and being a leader. These are advanced management skills that organizations are looking for beyond the technical skills that supply chain professionals have. And this is the leadership side of the domain within supply chain. There are two functions within an organization that have to know everything. The first is finance. Nothing happens in an organization without finance having a role or an opinion on. Secondly, supply chain. Nothing occurs, whether it's research or whether it's recycling, reusing, manufacturing. Every aspect of it, supply chain has a role. And we fully expect to see supply chain professionals take that leadership role the same way that CFOs take their leadership role beyond the tactical to a much more strategic imperative.